Well, hello, everybody. Let me try that again. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to Aquarius Rising Africa. It's very, very chilly here. So I hope you're all warm wherever you are, because goodness me, the last few days have absolutely taken our weathers by storm here, that's for sure. Anyway, I'm looking forward to having Mr. Leo Zagami, our favorite Italian, with us again this evening. We're going to be talking about, it should update in a minute. It's not only exposing California campuses, but the United States, all the campuses that are following this satanic really, that's the only way to put it, sort of propaganda. So Leo's going to be chatting to us about that. And also good news, as you can see, Aquarius Rising Africa is back and running again. So we're going to be rescheduling Leo's book club as well. And other than that, for this weekend, we have Kathy O'Brien on Saturday and Sunday. So we're going to have Kathy on Aquarius Rising Africa tomorrow, 5 p.m. Central Africa time. That's my time, which is 2 hours before now. Now it's 7 o'clock or just after. So 2 hours before this, as well as Sunday on Solutions. We're going to be talking about solutions, healing, and harmony with Kathy. So, yay, looking forward to hanging out with you all this weekend. And if you missed our show earlier on Rumble with Joanne on the untold story of Adolf Hitler, very cool. We commenting on that. We're giving a commentary on that. Very interesting indeed. Anyway, without any further ado, ta-da. Mr. Zagami, so good to see you.
With a pleasure. And finally, we are back on this great channel of ours without any further distractions, I hope. And welcome to a very interesting show in which we will debate a very important topic at the moment, which is at the core of the problems of the present and future, because of course we rely on the young people for our future, and if the young people are brainwashed in our campuses of our colleges and universities, then it's very difficult to establish a let's say balanced society in the future.
Exactly. And it's quite scary actually, you know. I mean, look, I'm not a politician, but I know enough to know that there's nonsense going on, right? And for me, it's very interesting to see, you know, you get guys like Charlie Kirk is the one I can think of offhand, Candace Owens as well, people like that, who really go around and especially speaking to the younger students on these campuses. Their ideas are absolutely, in my opinion, unbelievable. Just in terms of the way they look at the topic of, let's say, abortion, the way they look at gender, you know, no matter what you choose to be in life, you know, I think it's common sense that there, for example, are only two genders. But the stories and the concoctions we're hearing coming out of these youngsters' mouths right now, it's scary to say the least, that's for sure.
I think the problem goes back to the end of the 60s when these educational, the whole educational system here in the United States, but also in the rest of the Western world, was taken over by those leftists who eventually became the professors of these institutions. And that's the big problem also today. You know, we are in a situation in which you have elite universities like Columbia, like Yale, like many others, used as radical left hotbeds, where they are pushed towards a certain ideology, which is built on something which doesn't really have any foundation in reality, because this kind of ideology goes back to what I have talked about in volume 8 of my Confessions, to the Frankfurt School, to that critical theory, which is really not based on hard facts, but rather on critiques of society which have no concrete solutions, let's say. And so you
exactly.
are with these marching parrots, these youngsters who whose family have spent a lot of money to send them to these to these colleges or universities, and they become parrots of some kind of propaganda, which nowadays is becoming even more dangerous than in the past. Because it's not only promoting leftist ideology, but it's mixing it up with Islamic ideology in something that in a recent interview, Nazi Moinian is an Iranian-born adjunct fellow at the Middle East Institute who has recently joined Chris Cuomo on an interview that I have posted together with an article which I invite you to read at leozagami.com, in which he says the situation resembles dangerously what has happened, what the campuses of Iran looked like before the revolution. And we know what that brought us. It brought us basically Khomeini and his Ayatollah and mullahs and fundamentalist Shia, mixing it up with the young communists and an Islamo-communist mix, which still to this day, unfortunately, destabilizes the whole of the Middle East. Now, without having to go through a whole history lesson on why that happened and why the Shah was deposed in 1979, I will eventually suggest for those interested rather to read volume 10, which is one of the books that we're going to touch in the future book club of ours. But it's about the whole enthusiasm that, the flower generation had towards this leftist ideology that in reality never really manifested in anything positive. So, you can idolize Fidel Castro or Che Guevara, but when you go and study their lives, there's very little to idolize. And the actual, not only the situation that was there in those days, but the one in the present, where Cuba, for example, is a country which often has problems even of the most basic needs, and they don't have electricity. Often they have blackouts, and they are, of course, living in a situation which is primitive compared to the rest of the Western world. Rather than instead moving further, communism has helped them stay isolated, and that happens, of course, also in other countries like North Korea, for example, or Venezuela. I mean, we could be here citing a whole bunch of countries that we shouldn't really follow as an example, but instead the young people in these campuses are brainwashed left, right, and center to think that is a solution. And up until very recently, we could say, okay, the Democratic Party is not really all leftist. There is some elements that want to keep it a little bit center left. Instead, now, with the arrival of Zoran Mamdani, which is the possible new mayor of New York City, because he has won the primaries of the Democratic Party, we are really reflecting on the paradox of a Shia Muslim fundamentalist who at the same time is pushing the socialist values openly as a socialist, and he's actually gaining the support of people who seem to be very much confused and disappointed with what the Democratic Party has become. And that is, of course, not our fault. But the fact that we have a young guy like him who is the son of a professor at Columbia University. So remember, that is a very important thing that very few people have discussed at the moment about Zoran Mamdani. He is the son of academics. He's not just simply a Muslim dude born in Uganda, out of all countries, by the way, of Indian descent. So also born in your African continent, my dear, which is fueled by this communist rising, which we have seen also producing very bad things in South Africa, hate for the white farmers and so on. This, of course, you can confirm because you are over there. But at the same time, this growing Islamophobia, which is also, growing Islamophobia and at the same time growing Judeophobia, because, one thing doesn't go with the other. So in campuses, they hate the Jews. Then, of course, the right will say, oh, these people are, and they will start hating the Islamic people for doing that. So it kind of like triggers a situation of hate on both directions. But when you say, for example, Candace Owen, recently I was very disappointed by this woman when she took a very hard anti-Semitic stand against Israel and the Jewish people in general. Because, of course, the situation in Gaza, which is still ongoing, is facilitating this whole, anti-Semitic situation. But it's quite incredible how the Democratic Party has become really the center for this whole anti-Jewish rhetoric. But at the same time, now we have people like Candace Owens or Fuentes who are on the opposite, who are also embracing the same anti-Semitic rhetoric. So here we have, quite incredibly, the oppose, the radical left and the radical right meeting up in this anti-Semitic narrative, which is very dangerous. And on top of that, in these campuses, of course, what we see is not only an anti-Semitic rhetoric, which is quite evident, and that's pushed people like Trump to take away funds from universities like Harvard, but it is the fact that this Islamo-leftism, which is a paradox in itself, because, when I see at the gay pride, even in Rome, people chanting Palestine, Palestine, Gaza, and flags, these people will not last 1 minute in Gaza. They will be killed at the 5th minute. They will be thrown off the roof. Do they realize how paradoxical, how crazy is to sustain, if you are a member of the LGBTQ community, a Muslim? It doesn't make any sense. And you see, people like this candidate have understood this leftism, Islamo-leftist narrative to a point in which this candidate is now pushing for gender reassignment investments in gender reassignment. Him, who is a Muslim, who is a communist in New York, who might become the mayor of New York, it's investing money, wants New York to invest money in gender reassignment. That doesn't make any sense. It's like the Muslims come here in the Western world and suddenly they merge with the leftists and they completely go against their own religion, by the way. I really don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense. Zoran Mandani wants to spend 65 million on gender-affirming care, including for minors. And he's supposed to be a Muslim? I repeat, he goes in the Middle East and says something like that, he lasts 5 minutes. At the 5th minute, he will also be thrown off the roof. So this is what we have produced here in the West, thanks to tolerance, thanks to a democracy which unfortunately seems to have some weak spots, which are, of course, taken advantage by these people. I repeat, when we talk about Islamo-leftism, it's a paradox in itself. I don't know what you think about it, Chantelle, but to me, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, Islamoleftism is now becoming a reality, and actually it was created, this whole thing about Islamoleftism, I'm talking created as an ideology, by a French philosopher called Pierre-André Tageff. And this guy, in 2002, started in certain intellectual circles, academical circles, to push this idea. And so suddenly we have people like him describing Islamofascism as a type of anti-Zionism that is popular among the new third worldists, the neo-communists, the neo-leftists, and of course all the anti-globalization. But at the same time, it can be adopted by people who maybe follow the alternative media that supports Trump. And so there is a split in the MAGA world when you have all this anti-Semitic rhetoric, because it doesn't make any sense. It's like when two opposites, you have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which I've explained in my latest book in volume 12 here, is a product of the Jesuits. She was launched by America, the Jesuit Review, the official magazine of the Jesuits in America in 2018 with an official presentation. She is somebody who claims she's from the Bronx, but in reality was brought up in a rich suburb and who is completely fake in what she said, that now might actually candidate herself to President of the United States if this guy wins in New York. The Democratic Party is thinking of putting amongst the candidates in the primaries for the next election Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a former bartender whose IQ is basically the IQ of a donkey, but for real, a real donkey. And I'm not saying because she's a woman, because there's many intelligent women across the world, but this woman should have stayed a bartender, because she has never said anything clever in her whole life. So the fact that, I repeat, you have people like Nick Fuentes, who goes on Alex Jones, who claims to be an American far-right political pundit, activist, live streamer, and whatnot, whose ideas now coincide with the extreme left. I mean, should make you think that the people who are on top of all this, they are laughing their asses off. And those are, of course, like I explained in volume 12 of my Confessions, the Jesuits, because their narrative in anti-Semitism has always been to blame the Jews, so nobody then focuses on them, focuses on the Jesuits, the ones who have let into this country 10 million illegal immigrants during the presidency of the second Catholic president in history, Joe Biden. The NGOs, the Catholic NGOs responsible are the Catholic NGOs that often are controlled by the Jesuits. And those countries where these people come from, Central and South America, are Jesuit strongholds. That means that their intention is to change the political landscape of the United States from a Protestant country to something that, of course, is going to resemble soon a third world country if we don't stop it. I mean, there is the Jesuits working along other factions like the progressive Jews. The progressive Jews themselves are a product of the Sabbatean Frankists. And I've explained all that, as you know, in volume 10, in the last chapter of this great book, which is a book everybody should read to understand also how the anti-Semitic narrative was built up with books like The Protocols of the Sages of Zion. Now, I think that we have to be very careful here, because if we have colleges and universities that are starting to produce elements of destabilization that are even capable of going and shooting in the back the head of a pharmaceutical company. No, I'm not saying, that of a medical whatever company that is Mangioni, no, who did that whole thing. I mean, they are becoming increasingly violent. They're not just, students shouting, free Palestine and all this BS. They are becoming violent, and they are brought to this violence through radicalization that goes through the considerably overestimated universities and college campuses of today, which are all controlled by the Jesuits. Now, in my latest article, which I have sent you, I've also talked to you about the insane teachings that a private Jesuit university, which was the university of the current governor of this state, Governor Newsom, and I'm talking about the University of Santa Clara, which is at the center of Silicon Valley, so it represents also a very important presence there. Well, a student recently had to leave this university, which is located at the center of Silicon Valley, and it's a Jesuit institution, because she was forced and exposed to consume sadomasochistic pornography and submit a sexual autobiography in order to continue her studies there. And when this whole thing was exposed by the, because at one point, the whole thing was actually exposed by the mainstream press and the Wall Street Journal, the actual Jesuit university stands by this course of sexual bondage video and required sexual autobiography because they said it has to prepare them for the future. A future of what? Of perverts? If I want to study this kind of perversions, I shouldn't be going to a Jesuit university where, a certain ethic and moral should be required. But instead, it's no longer required because the people who teach are themselves a bunch of priestly perverts. And that's really a situation of great gravity, I think, when you have even Jesuit. And then not only that, I recently gave an interview with a dear friend called Professor Daryl Amamoto, who is an American academic who has taught for almost 23 years at the University of California before retiring in 2018, was confirmed during the show that that the whole of California's university and educational system is controlled by the Jesuits. Not only, the Jesuit institutions, they control every single educational institution in this state. And so that makes us sort of, we talked in the past, I think also of the other things that happened in this great state. But recently, what we have seen in Los Angeles with the riots, with the immigrants incited by the Jesuits who were present there in front of the ICE agents. So that means, I repeat, that these people are using the campuses of the university, of the colleges, to brainwash people for their own radical agenda, which is a sick agenda, which will transform America in a third world country, but also the rest of the Western world. I'm not talking about only America, because of course I live here in the United States of America, but the same thing can be said of the universities of Italy, of the rest of Europe, of Great Britain. Great Britain is nowadays an Islamo-communist state in which every single mayor of every single city of relevance in the UK is Muslim. And it is a Muslim connected to the Labour Party, mostly. And there is no real opposition to all this, Chantelle, because, the UK is basically lost. And we have to think about recently, the French intelligence has published a report in which they said there is a danger for not only the radicalization, but the takeover of the whole country by the Muslims. So, I used to be understanding toward Muslims, but the Islamists have taken over Islam. So, you can say, okay, there is Muslims, I just want the peace. Well, it's a religion of peace. They tell you it's a religion of peace. Well, let me remind you, even Khomeini, when he came to power and he was fronted by a journalist saying, you have those hostages in the American embassy. And he said, oh, but we don't want war. We are a religion of peace. I don't think that Khomeini or the Ayatollahs of Iran were ever a religion of peace. And they killed thousands of people. They oppressed women in a way. Why did the Khomeini and his radical Muslims take over Iran? Because at one point, the Shah had given the opportunity for the first time in history to the women to take positions of power and being elected as lawmakers. And immediately, the whole Shia clerics headed by Khomeini opposed that. And eventually they overthrew the whole the government, and they kicked out the Shah. And we should be now even discussing with these people. And there is people, and the majority of campuses here in the United States support Iran because they're infiltrated by Iranian agents of their terrorist organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. Here in the United States of America, I'm not talking about the Middle East. I'm saying here there is on campuses a dangerous tendency to radicalize the youth and to recruit them for possible acts of terrorism. When a guy went there, you remember, not so long ago, and shot a couple of people working at the Israeli embassy while they were coming out of an exhibition in a museum in Washington, D.C., shouting, "Free, free Palestine." Guys, I don't know what's wrong with you, but if you can't see where the threat is here, because, the threat, it seems, in the alternative media, in the so-called alternative media, suddenly it's the Jew this, the Jew that. But a Jew has never done anything wrong against me. But Muslims have done things wrong against me, including taking my son I haven't seen since 2008. So I know that these people are animals. And I'm sorry to say that. I don't have any tolerance any longer for Muslims who have been taken over by the Islamists, meaning the fundamentalist part of Islam is dictating. They say, they are a minority. So why this minority, they are actually controlled by a minority? Because it means that in reality, when they go back home, not when they are in the outside world dealing with, especially if they live in the West, trying to be all nice and diplomatic and saying Islam is a religion of peace. But when they go back home, they're fundamentalists like the other ones. Because if your intention is to eradicate fundamentalism, denounce them all. And don't instigate what you are instigating in our campuses, in our universities, because that is dangerous, very dangerous, and it could bring the whole of the Western world to a confrontation. Because, yes, of course, when you're talking about Europe, or you're talking about South Africa, or Australia, or these countries have given up their weapons. But here in America, once the confrontation starts, you're going to see the white people embracing guns against the Muslims. And it's not a question of race here, because, you have a lot of Muslims who are in support of Trump, who are in support. But the thing is, they're not doing enough to take away that radicalization, that radical element. And that radical element, now that is involved in politics, and that now might take over one of the most important cities in the United States, which is New York City. Well, Wall Street is actually fearing a lot this situation, and many institutions of importance in one of the most important cities in the world are threatening to leave. And I can't blame them. Now, paradoxically, the current mayor that, the Adams, who was perceived as a leftist because he was a Democrat, is suddenly, Adams is going guest on Fox News and is actually showing himself to be a moderate and a guy who at least supports law and order. So now the craziness is, if in New York we can't have a Republican or somebody that puts some sense in them, then necessarily has to be a former Democrat. And in that case, it will be Adams as an independent, Eric Adams, or even Cuomo, though Cuomo, of course, is somebody who I despise. So, but of course, let's go and see what's happening in New York. There is a long tradition of Italo-Americans, but let's see what de Blasio did. I mean, he was a complete failure. So I think that Wall Street needs to move, probably in Texas or probably in Florida, but somewhere safer than in a place that could really become like Escape of New York, from New York. I mean, you had a movie, no? I don't know if you remember the movie, Chantelle. The movie Escape from New York, no? It was this movie from 1981 that everybody remembers, with the mythical Kurt Russell in his role as a snake, Plixen, however he was called, and he was definitely escaping. He arrived into a city where there was, I think, a plane that fell down with the president. He had to recover him, and it was ruled by gangs. It was basically a city where nobody wanted to live. That was, in a way, transformed in a prison for those who lived there. And so I think that, unfortunately, New York City in the hands of these people, and people say Israel is a terrorist state. Yes, sure. But why don't you go and be a Christian in the Middle East today and see who is going to be tolerant towards you? People who, I like the fact that, I'm not saying that Netanyahu is a saint. The guy, of course, also should be dealt with at one point politically within Israel, and hopefully they find somebody better. But at the moment, if we have to be honest, the situation with Gaza, they say, we have to find a solution. But the solution from the start was simply picking up those hostages and giving them back to Israel. That was the only solution. There is no other solution. And of course, a lot of innocent people died. But then people forget, the kids die in Gaza. Yes, but at 13 in Gaza, you're given an AK-47 and you are part of Hamas. You are not a kid like in the Western world. You are radicalized from the age of 6 and 7. So people need to really have, maybe people should go to the Middle East and have, a little bit their ideas on the ground rather than on the internet. That's the problem, Chantelle. I've been in the Middle East. I know what the Middle East is about. I know the Middle East. I know the powerful people in the Middle East. Back in the days, I was lucky enough to be guested in Egypt at the time by Mubarak and by the Boutros Ghali family, which gave me a great insight on how the Middle East operates. But most people talk here. They don't have a clue. They've never been in the Middle East. Yeah. They are capable only of saying Israel is genocide, this and that. Guys, Israel is the only place in the Middle East where you can actually resemble some form of democracy, because then, of course, you can say maybe Jordan, but all the other, and Egypt, at times, it has, unfortunately, all these Muslim countries have a fundamentalist element that tends to resurface from time to time. Though, for example, in Egypt currently, the Muslim Brotherhood has been outlawed. The Muslim Brotherhood that has helped the founding of Hamas. So it's really a lot of ignorance that derives people, because they don't know neither the story of Islam, neither the story of Judaism, or neither the story of Christianity. Just the other day in Syria, a bunch of Christians were killed in a church. And that is made possible by the fact that, unfortunately, it's true that they overthrew Assad, but now they have as a leader somebody who was with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who would be rather tolerant about the persecution of Christians. And for that reason, I'm not always, I understand that Trump needs to be diplomatic and taking care of American interests. And so he said, okay, let's give this guy a chance, this former terrorist who is now in control of Syria. But they are, unfortunately, the Muslims, when they are in power, very rarely, if not in certain countries where there is a certain degree of tolerance, like I said, like Egypt or Jordan. But even in Egypt, I saw the Copts, how they have to guard themselves. For example, when I used to go almost daily to the Coptic holy site in Cairo, I remember that back in 2003, I was completely surrounded by military because they were afraid that Muslims would come there and blow themselves up in churches that have existed there for over 1,000 years. I mean, it doesn't happen with the Christians. They don't go in the mosque and blow themselves up. Eventually, if you see mosques that are blow themselves, like in Pakistan, it happens between the Shia and the Sunni that blow each other up. So we need to have a more historical understanding of the context and understand that at the moment, of course, the decision that Trump took to destroy this nuclear program, which was started by Khamenei, the successor of Khomeini, because he wants to have, this ultimate weapon that can gain, then he can use against Israel, but he can use also to become the leading state of terrorism in the Middle East, because that's what Iranians have been doing since 1979. They have supported not only their own Shia factions like Hezbollah, but also the Sunni, the Salafit. So they don't really make, they don't really, like in the past, Shia and Sunni will be very divided. But in the case of the Iranians, they are always united when it comes to extremism. And that is, I think, the big problem. So today we have been exposing what is happening on the campuses of the United States, because unfortunately there is foreign countries like China, Iran, who have all their interests to brainwash, destabilize, and spy upon the campuses. Or, they've been recently many arrests here in the United States with the students who were bringing in this country biological weapons that could be used on crops and could create damage that will really create problems for the agricultural sustainability, the actual agricultural scenario here in the United States. China is a country that is working alongside Iran because they have the oil that they are given by cheap, and that is of great help for China. At the same time, Russia is supporting Iran simply because at the time of Khomeini, after the initial the revolution came by, and of course the revolution was done against the Shah, who had all his money abroad, but also all the gold, like I explained in volume 10, was brought out and deposited at the Vatican Bank. So in the end, the Iranians were left with very little financing for their future projects, and at that point they asked their help, the help of the Soviet Union. So since that time, Russia has borrowed a lot of money to Iran. But Iran actually has always had problems with Russia because it's a neighbor, and it's a neighbor that has a lot of interest in the region. And in 1941, for example, when Reza Shah, the founder of the Pahlavi dynasty, was too close to Germany, then we had both Russia and Great Britain invading Iran. And but at the moment, Russia has borrowed only in 2022 and 2023 something like almost 3 billion to Russia, to Iran. So Russia has economic interest. It's not like if tomorrow morning the Iranian Islamic Republic disappears, they will lose a lot of money. So this is why there has been actually an intervention from Putin to Trump, and then the foreign minister of Iran going also to Moscow and discussing with Putin the whole situation. China is buying land in the USA, like somebody is saying, next to USA Air Force, but also is buying land all over the place here in the US because unfortunately they are not stopped. If we go and buy land ourselves as American citizens in China, they will immediately say, forget about it. No? When instead we have always had the Democrats who are way too close to the Chinese. Here in California, remember when, for example, it was 2 or 3 years ago, the Governor Newsom suddenly went for an official visit to China. He was received like some kind of hero along the China Wall, and he was filmed, and everybody was greeting him like when. And then before, when actually Xi Jinping came to San Francisco, there were communist flags, and suddenly San Francisco, which is currently the shithole of America, city in great decline, was cleaned up, made all nice and beautiful for the arrival of the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, California has some serious problems at the moment because of its links with China, but these are historical links that go back hundreds of years. And let's not forget that we had a Chinese community that was used for the building of the railways, who was here for 200 and more years, and the actual founder of modern China for a time was in San Francisco, protected by Chinese Freemasonry. And Chinese Freemasonry has one of the most influential lodges in San Francisco. And Xi didn't come only to check out his investment, but come because San Francisco, I repeat, is considered an historical birthplace of modern China, of the overthrow of the empire that preceded it. So, I mean, if you go and check out the history of Chinese Freemasonry, you will see that in reality, one of their strongest headquarters is in of the Chi Kung Tong, which was established in 1880 in San Francisco, and their headquarters are there. I mean, if you want, I can show you a picture of it. Through our common screen sharing.
Yep.
What does it say here? It says, Qigong building at 3638 Spotted Alley in Chinatown, San Francisco, Chi Kung Tong. If I go back like this and I show you, it says here, the fraternity founded its headquarters in San Francisco in the United States, established in 1880. That's it. This is history. You cannot, I mean, when you're talking about history, you cannot just, invent these things. These are facts. The Chinese Illuminati and the Freemasons of China have a powerful base here in California. And it was established with the purpose of promoting Chinese values, customs, and the ideals of so-called democracy in their eyes. And the society is considered the oldest Chinese-rooted organization established in the United States. And Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who was the guy who founded modern China, was one of the most eminent members. This is the guy who founded the Republic of China and its first political party. Both Taiwan and mainland China are the result of what Sun Yat-sen did: revolution in statements and political philosophy. That's why, guys, you know, it's about history, and history is history. So the fact that Chinese Freemasonry works here along with the Jesuits, hand in hand. And as you know, I've been mentioning this before. I have a whole chapter of the Chinese and the Jesuits and the relationship that goes back to the 16th century. I mean, it goes back almost 500 years. So it's about and for people who are a little bit confused about the nature of Chinese Freemasonry, don't think for a moment that we are talking about anything resembling Western Freemasonry. They simply took the symbols, the compass and the square, and all the Western symbols, and copied them like the Chinese copy everything, and inserted them in their own secret societies, which were built to oppose the imperial dynasty that preceded the revolution. And the long march of Mao Zedong eventually brought us to what we have today, which is modern China. It's definitely not a democracy. It's definitely not a democracy in the way that even the guy that we just saw was trying to, bring, Sun Yat-sen was trying when he overthrew the imperial dynasty that ruled China and he founded the Republic of China. He didn't have the idea of establishing a communist state. But then later on, unfortunately, Mao Zedong took on the whole country. And so they didn't what was founded by this guy that we just mentioned actually maintained itself only in Taiwan. And Taiwan was kept and protected by Henry Kissinger in the 1950s when he threatened Mao Zedong and the Chinese with the nuclear attack. At the time, China didn't have nuclear weapons, and so Kissinger just simply said to Mao Zedong, you see, you want to end up like Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Please invade Taiwan. And of course he did it. Nowadays, China is increasingly having more and more nuclear weapons in their arsenal. They don't have, of course, the 5,000 nuclear weapons we have or Russia has, but they are building their arsenal. And within the next 10 years, they might even reach us. And to tell you the truth, you don't really need 5,000 nuclear weapons because nobody will ever use them. No, to destroy the whole humankind, you probably need a lot less than that. So it's all about using this weaponry for psychological tensions or psychological operation on a massive scale. So I think that, please.
It's completely done on a massive scale. And I'm hearing what you're saying and sort of also going back to what we were speaking about right in the beginning, going back to the 50s with the flower power, that sort of stuff, 60s rather.
In San Francisco.
But
yeah,
but at the same...
It's very important because San Francisco was at that time the base for MK Ultra, like I explained in volume 11, and the base for Chinese Freemasonry. Is that a coincidence?
No. But what I also want to say to that is that in the 60s at the same time, if we think about that, that's when Rockefellers introduced the feminist movement. Basically, the feminist movement was introduced then. So that's when women were encouraged to put their children into schools, preschools, stuff like that, right? Women encouraged to go back to work. So initially that would have been the breakdown of the family unit. So when we're looking at the initial breakdown of the family unit, so that the schooling system now gets control over your children's education, right? Mommy, and I mean any mother knows, right? When the first 5 or 6 years of a child's life, mommy is number one, right? And then put that child in school and suddenly mommy knows nothing, the teacher knows everything, right? So it's kind of like they've taken that away and immediately giving the kids over to the teachers who they've already obviously had trained and conditioned in their universities, their colleges, and as we're seeing now, 60 odd years later, we're seeing this whole craziness that's erupting in the young people with this transgender movement.
Before, I mean, interrupt you, but before Rockefeller came into the equation and sponsored it and pushed it, it was theosophy that pushed feminism. Through the idea of the divine feminism, they actually established through a series of people that were very influential also in the foundation of co-masonry, of a movement that mixed for the first time women and men in Freemasonry, like this whole concept of theosophy and feminism in England then gave it was like we have connections between theosophy, feminism, pacifism, anti-imperialism, socialism. It's like they're all together. So theosophy with Madame Blavatsky is not only something that gave us the New Age movement, but gave us also the groundworks for feminism. And that is not to be forgotten.
Yeah. And I think, there's such a fine line between feminism and the feminine energy. There's a big difference. And it's a very fine line. And these guys, what they...
That line, though, that the fine line. They went into the politicization of the divine feminine.
Exactly. That's exactly it, because they know exactly how to blur these lines. So now they take away the mother figure in your life, which every child needs for at least the first 8 years. Your parental unit has to be a very strong unit in your life, because that's what gives you your foundation as a child. Any psychology will tell you that. However, speaking about psychology as well, in the 60s, psychology and psychiatry came into being as well, because before that, any mental issue was treated in psychiatric wards with electroshock therapy or whatever it was. It was completely shamed to have a mental and think about it, Leo. If you look at World War I, World War II, we were just products of parents who'd been in the war. Doesn't matter what side you were on. So there was lots of scattered already emotions. So just when unification again happens, the world stabilizes, right? 20 odd years later, when people are getting married again, families are starting to be built, suddenly, boom, let's take that away. And now let's introduce again the feminist movement, which takes mom away from the home. So we get more tax. We can have more money. The children are now pliable in our hands. And of course, we know these guys don't do things overnight. This is done over decades, as we can see. That was 60 years ago, and this is a product thereof. So not only is it the kids on campuses going crazy, the world is going crazy. They have not had the mother supporting, the family unit supporting them call it 50 odd years now. That so the mother role has been literally farmed out.
So the social engineering is not only the product, of course, of the current situation on campuses, but also of the father and mothers of those kids who are now in campuses. That is
right.
The right take on the thing. Yeah. So something that goes back, but of course brings us then to the flower power, so-called flower power revolution.
Free sex. Yeah.
The freedom that was, perceived and promoted, abortion being promoted like a sign of modernization, and any opposition to it will be bigotry. That is how it was in the 70s. People maybe have a short memory span, but that's how it was in the 70s. And then you had all these gurus that were just in line with what the Theosophical Society have always been pushing from India and so on. You had the whole, let's say, destruction of the family unit, because it was no longer fashionable to have a father and a mother in a traditional sense. It was all very open. You had these, you remember in the early 70s and late 60s, they started with these communes, this group of people that will gather maybe around a more charismatic figure, and they will start taking acid on a massive amounts of acid or other drugs. And then the kids were raised in this context where everything was permitted. Albeit, though, if you think about it, along the lines of the Abbey of Thelema in the 1920s, which was the experiment brought forward by Aleister Crowley, who was himself a representative of the Theosophical Society and was using that milieu to establish his Illuminati circle. So you see, and then you have the Beatles putting on the cover of Sgt. Pepper Lonely Heart, Aleister Crowley. You had Sympathy for the Devil from the Rolling Stones. You had a tendency to be way too close to the demonic and to the devil as something cool. Right. So that was the dark side of the age of Aquarius,
Exactly. And, I'm a great believer, because in order to heal something or fix it, we've got to go to the source or the root of it.
Yeah.
And really, if we want to fix the chaos that the world is in, and we must remember each and every one of us have contributed to this chaos in our own way. So we can't say it's them, they did it, they made us do it, they must fix it. No, we all need to fix it in our own way. And that, for me, in order to heal that, and to heal simply means to get back into balance again, right? We have to go back to honoring the family unit. And that does not necessarily mean you've now got to go and have lots of babies, blah, blah, blah. But it's about going and understanding, what is your family? Where are your roots? Where do you come from? Because that forms your foundation, right? And whatever that is, we've got to go back to and look at the distraction of especially with African Americans and the male, the African American male. I mean, I know there's been lots of studies and talks done on in recent years how the distraction of African American families has been so high, hence the crime rate increasing in the African American society. We understand that every family needs a strong father and a supportive and strong mother. So divorce has become so easy. Hey, I'm a single mother, so I'm not judging. Trust me, I did that walk for many years, okay? But through that, I've come from a very stable family. My parents were married for 56 years before my father passed away. So I am and 6 kids, we've got strong foundations. I, on the other hand, left my ex when my child was 18 months old. So I understand what the difference between having that solid foundation, having grown up in that family unit, where even though my father was 6'6", I'll tell you something, I never, ever, ever felt scared of him, ever. I mean, when he raised his voice and I knew I did something wrong, absolutely, I was going to like behave myself. But it was the safest, securest environment I could ever hope for as a child.
No, so
However, when
two parents that were together for the whole course of my life, and then my father passed away in 2010. He was still with my mother, but yeah, definitely it was another generation, like you said, the generation that was brought up during the war, a generation that suffered also during that time, because I had to hear for years the tales of my mother under the German bombs in London, or you know, the stories of my father leaving Sicily for north of Italy because of what was happening during the war. He was born actually the year the war started. So I mean, definitely a different generation. Though unfortunately, then my generation, our generation, didn't really build up the certainties because of the instabilities, like you just pointed out, that they might have occurred. And of course, the family unit doesn't offer that kind of assurance. And like you said, here in America, in particular in the African American community, we have this problem. So yeah, definitely, because they have been the ones that, but let's think about the fact that, for example, they have also been the victims of the influence of organizations like the Black Panther Party that was active in the United States between 1966 and 1982, and particularly in cities like San Francisco, New York City, Chicago. A Marxist, Leninist, and Black Power political organization who people might not really tend to discuss these days, but at the time it was just in line with all the other Marxist organization operating on campuses. And the result of it is, unfortunately, like you said, the disgregation of the family unit, of the traditional values. And nowadays we have a typical Black father who has maybe fathered 10 different children with 10 different women. And this is, of course, chaos on a massive scale. Because
if you just, sorry, Leo, just interjecting while you're saying that, because as someone who's a healer, and I've worked with people and children for the past 30 years, one thing I can tell you is that every single child has a deep pain and a deep longing to know its biological parents. These children who are just made willy-nilly with a baby daddy because I was pissed off and taken, whatever the reasons are. I mean, the emotional distraction. Now we must remember everything is energy. You see, this is part of the breakdown of our society, because the emotional distraction that causes leaves these people feeling very often lost, angry, and then they become often criminals in society, right? If we're looking at the trend, that's what's happening. And that's all due to the breakdown of the family unit. So when we can recognize that as individuals, we have to go and fix that within our own unit, because this war, this chaos that we're constantly having is really coming from the degradation of spiritual morals, definitely, emotional morals, thought processes that we're conditioned to, and of course then how we carry that out physically in the world that we live in. And if you've only ever known negativity and pain and trauma, there is no ways that we're going to be able to live another life unless you do some serious healing. But at the end of the day, you know, I think we've got to really go back to the things we have to. That's what we as the people have to do. Go back to our values, take responsibility for things that we've done, fix what we need to fix in our own lives. And so we will inevitably all knit society together.
Now, the problem earlier this month we had the Bilderberg meeting, for example. One of the subjects was depopulation. I mean, in the mind of the elite, often the elite came from the Western world. There was actually to destroy the family unit, because then they could be left with immigration from third world countries that is far more easy to control. They seem to still be producing childs. They still seem to have some kind of family values within their religious, like, for example, in Central South America, the very Catholic background of the immigrants, or from the Muslim countries, the Muslim background provides very much for a family unit which is closer to a traditional family unit, something that we have lost in the West. But that was done on purpose, because people ask me, why are they, they prefer to have all these immigrants in our countries? It's cheap labor, they're easily controllable. And this is sad, but it's true. They are easily controllable. Actually, they don't pose a threat. I mean, think about, the representatives of the political parties, like the one who I just mentioned has now won the primary in New York City, dancing half naked in a video with a bunch of and he's supposed to be some kind of a Muslim, and then they don't even reflect their origins, but they are easily to manipulate. The members of the Democratic Party here that are, for example, from South or Central America, of course, they are all brainwashed and in line with whatever the Jesuits tell them. Because, you see, it all goes back to something that I talked about in volume 12, which is that experiment that was conducted in the 17th century by the Jesuits in South America with the Guarani Indians. They picked up this indigenous population and they used them for an experiment of communism in the so-called reducciones, the reductions, because they were easily to manipulate. They saw them as, they saw the Jesuits as father figures, that they were like almost gods. They were controlled. The Jesuits would say, you now have a certain age, marry with this woman, grow up your family in a certain way. We control every angle of your thing. And that is still to this day the way they operate. I have talked about in one of my shows during the uprisings against ICE here in Los Angeles about an organization that was founded by a Jesuit, an organization that claims to be recovering members of the gangs. But the thing is that they are simply, brought into this country because they are pushed into the gangs through the illegal immigration, because at times that is the only option they have. And then when they are on the way to legalize their status, the Jesuits come there and they offer them an organization, I think it's called Homeboy. And this Homeboy organization brings them to the right path, but still maintaining some of their old ways. And they control them, from one state to the next. Because when they are with the gangs, people tell me, but who is the Vatican supporting the cartels? Of course, the Vatican supports the cartels. The cartel leaders go to the Vatican, they confess their sins, and they give their money. If you give their money, the Vatican will basically forgive any sins you ever committed. You can melt your enemy in acid, and the Vatican will bless you. Bless you, child. Give me $1 million. And that's how it works. So that is, the way they control these populations. It's very sad. I mean, I see how hard these workers work, these Mexicans here in Southern California, doing all kinds of jobs in extreme heat and stuff. But the fact is that in reality, they should always focus themselves in regularizing their position and their status instead of maintaining the fragility of an illegal immigrant. But because of the system that was built around them, giving them everything with the illusion that they didn't have to do what I did to become an American. I mean,
right.
It just takes some effort. And so I understand that you are a hard worker. I understand that, you know, you have fathered the children who are now American and all this, and you feel nobody can touch you. But now that the Trump administration is very serious about this issue, I will personally regularize myself immediately, even if I've been here for 50 years. Not to wake up one morning with the ICE agents at my door and everybody saying, oh, but I've been here for 50 years illegally. Well, you need to think about it, because I have done a lot of sacrifice to obtain my American citizenship. And so
absolutely.
You should do the same. And I don't even find, you know, like, I don't even find the fact that people say, I don't talk English. I have been here since 1973. You have been here since 1973 and you don't talk English? I'm sorry, this is not. I mean, the fact that in Southern California, often when I put the TV, we actually have ads in Spanish, which look like Mexican ads, is for me incomprehensible. It's outrageous. And I'm not talking because I'm a racist or whatever, because my grandfather was born in Chile. He was born in South America. I have South American blood. I have Indian blood. But, you know, things have to be done the right way with the respect of the country you're living in, not what happened in Los Angeles, where you are basically throwing stones at federal agents.
I agree. I fully agree. And demanding that your host country take on your ways. I mean, obviously, and I think in most countries, most open-minded Western countries, there's always different churches, different worship areas for people of different religions. I know it certainly is like that here. You know, I know there's a lot of respect given in most countries for that, though. But now it seems to be the taking over, the demanding, the sense of entitlement. And that's, you know, like all of this, what we are talking about now over the last 60 years, especially. And it didn't just happen then. That's when it was really put into practice. It was being planned a long time ago, as we were saying, to systematically break the system down, break people down. As you say, anyone who's been involved in any SRA or some type of this high level trauma and abuse, there's always a trauma involved. They will always traumatize that child horrifically, so that the child creates division between the parents, the rest of the family, friends, whatever the case might be.
Somebody here in the chat says, these immigrants pay the taxes, I'm Mexican, and so on. I also pay taxes. And I was Italian, and I was living here, and I went through everything possible and imaginable, sacrifices, which maybe ordinary people will not do, so I could finally claim American citizenship. And often, you know, some of these immigrants are busted because they have disrespected the law of this state, or this, of the United States of America. They have disrespected the law. So, of course, at that point, they can't any longer claim citizenship, and they're living thereby here illegally. No, but you can't be a jackass if you are not an American citizen. I never thought I would go around drunk or filled with drugs, because at that point I knew that I will never have the possibility, if I was busted, to become an American citizen. So you have to behave when you are here. That is really something very clever that was said recently that kind of left the whole view. You know, we have this show that goes on in the morning here, this leftist show, The View, with the Whoopi Goldberg and those idiots. And Arnold Schwarzenegger was being interviewed by them, and they thought, you know, that Arnold Schwarzenegger, as he's always been perceived as a rhino and somebody who's very close to, the left in a way, even if he was a Republican, and he was a governor here in California, so he has a great understanding also of immigrants, he will leave them, you know, with a pleasant answer. But he was very much opposed to what they were saying. In fact, he said, you know, first of all, I came here in this country and I went through everything and I was respectful of the laws of this country. You can't go around throwing stones and doing things at federal agents if you are an illegal. You cannot act like if you are an illegal. This is not your country. And so Arnold Schwarzenegger made it very clear. It's an honor to even have a green card. And you have to respect that. You know, when you're a permanent resident and you have the opportunity of being a permanent resident, I mean, these people, they go obtain a green card, and then the next thing they do, they are dealing with fentanyl, or they are selling drugs at the corner, or doing some screwed up thing, and then at that point they are like arrested by the immigration authorities. You need to behave. I personally, during the time I was with my green card, I respected all the rules. You don't have to associate in any way with anybody who is a felon. There's very strict rules. There is rules that you have to follow. And if you don't follow them, you cannot obtain the American citizenship, which is in the end a great honor, and you have to perceive it as such once you receive it. That's why I eventually last year also renounced immediately to my Italian citizenship and because I didn't perceive myself anymore as a European. I know that the Europeans have, like J.D. Vance has stated, and like now Rubio also have gone against any rules of freedom of expression or press. I myself, as you know, had to flee Italy in 2019 and never went back. And I'm still, I have the problem of not being able to go to see my mother or my friends, because in Italy, the Italian authorities still are after me. So only for what I write in my books, I'm not a criminal. I'm not a guy who sells drugs. I do books. I do articles. I give, I'm the maximum expression of freedom of speech. And that could not be tolerated in a continent with, these days, Europe is in the hands of people who are authoritarian in nature. If you don't go along with their narrative, they still have fact checkers on their social networks that we no longer have here in America. You might have them still, because what happened recently to your YouTube channel is no longer possible here in America. They don't do that anymore.
What?
They don't
block. You can get struck?
Yeah, you don't get struck anymore here. Here there is maximum freedom since Trump is in power. Yeah, you can say whatever you want.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because YouTube America still runs the show.
Chantelle, they gave me back 2 channels after 4 and 5 years that I have them.
Lucky you.
I thought those channels were forgotten. After the elections, immediately they were resurrected. Here, you can have freedom of speech. But that freedom of speech, of course, is for an American. It's not for a green card.
I was going to say, I think they're selective about that, because definitely exactly at the same time, because when my channel was previously struck, also try to resurrect it again. No, not allowed to. But isn't it a universal one YouTube that runs everything?
No. There is not a universal. Every single country goes through their own filters and laws. Absolutely. If you say certain things against the South African government in South Africa, you will be probably censored and not censored here in America. Here in America, during the
Right.
Biden era, we had the worst censorship possible. That's why
Yeah.
people really realize that we were censored. Even here in California, when they recalled Newsom and eventually he managed to survive the recall, you couldn't criticize the results, that your channel would be blocked because he made a deal with his friends in Silicon Valley, here in California state. But in the whole of the United States, under the Democrats, it was like living under the Nazis. You couldn't mention the pandemic, the vaccines, nothing. It was just a nightmare. Right. And Americans have voted something different. And in America, once you have something different in the White House, you actually tangible see the results. And I can say things now that I couldn't say before. You couldn't mention the vaccines. You couldn't mention COVID-19. You will be strike, boom, like this. You couldn't mention anything that the Democrats didn't think was in line with their power. And that demonstrates to all of us, regardless of what you think of Donald J. Trump, that because regardless, that was a move towards authoritarianism, which still is present in Europe, because my friends who live in Europe tell me there is still fact checkers on Facebook in Italy. Fact checkers have been dismantled and have lost their jobs here. Mark Zuckerberg went to Mar-a-Lago, and the day after, he dismantled the whole thing. In Europe, no, because the European Union has threatened Facebook, has threatened X, has threatened YouTube. There is parts of the European Union where you can't get Rumble, like France. They arrested the CEO of Telegram. Europe is a Nazi. It's of course Nazis. Germany and France who conduct the whole thing, like I explained in volume 12 of my Confessions. That's how Europe came together. They had to, after the war, the Jesuits managed to put together the Nazis and the French, and they got together this European Union. But you have a person who is obviously authoritarian in charge. Just yesterday, Ursula von der Leyen threatened Orban in Hungary, stating that if he didn't accept to have a gay pride in his again in Hungary, she will take away financing from the EU. And the answer that Orban gave to Ursula von der Leyen was very strict and very down to the point. He said, why don't you think about the real problems of Europe at the moment? And you have many, rather than wanting the gay pride in Hungary.
That, of course, is all part of the psychological warfare. It really is, that whole thing. It's all part of it, and it's a very important part of this war at this time. That's for sure.
Orban's motivation for not having the LGBTQ pride thing is simply this: I don't want to show little children in the street some gay guy with a perizoma, some homosexual wearing some kinky stuff in front of a child who is a minor. And that is simple. This is not against the gay people or the LGBTQ community. It's simply common sense. You don't have, this imposition of parading with half-naked gay men and crazy people dressed up as women and whatever in front of minors. They can do it in their country. You have
that's common sense. It's common sense. It's common sense. Common sense.
Out of the window, unfortunately, with these people. So
absolutely,
even threatens somebody like Orban, who is the head of his state, and he said, "Don't intervene in the sovereignty of my country." So the countries in the EU unfortunately, have limited sovereignty because they have chosen to be in a technocracy which is controlled by the people in the Bilderberg Club and Davos. And whatever is said in Davos or in the latest Bilderberg meeting, they have to accept. And so let's see what's going to happen in the future. But the problem is for our younger people, mostly going back to the subject of today, because unfortunately I see them being brainwashed left, right, and center. And they seem to, especially, we had these elections here in America with Trump, who have demonstrated that still the young people in America are capable of reasoning. But I read an article just the other week from a leftist, one of these leftist papers, that was saying it's a one-off. The young people have decided to vote Trump, but it was only a one-off. I'm sure they're not going to do the same mistake twice. The same mistake. I mean, if your next proposal is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or some other leftist communist lunatic like the probable future mayor of New York, well, I'm sure that the American people in the great majority are going to continue to support Trump and support what is happening currently. I'm not saying that, Trump is perfect, but I mean, I have literally in front of me the demonstration that I'm able to talk with you freely without the FBI knocking at my door. And during the years of Joe Biden, the FBI was used as a political force. And a lot of my friends who didn't even go inside the Capitol Hill on the 6th of January 2021 were simply in Washington that day, had the FBI visiting them and knocking to their door and asking them questions about what they were doing on the 6th of January 2021. And they didn't go inside the Capitol Hill. That was the level of dictatorship that the Democrats and the Jesuits brought to this country during the Joe Biden presidency. And Joe Biden wasn't even signing the executive orders. There was a woman in charge for him that was doing all the decisions. The guy was senile and increasingly out of his mind. And so people, Joe Biden was simply a puppet in the hands of Barack Hussein Obama and Alex Soros, who just the other week married with Huma Abedin, the ex-lover and secretary of Hillary Clinton, out of all people.
Yeah, the crazy one with that does these horrific things. Crazy.
But
Wow.
you see, we have really dodged the bullet, as they say, when we didn't have Kamala Harris in charge of everything, because that would have led us to a path of being a totalitarian state, just like in the European Union or any other country in the world. And thanks God, even with many limitations, I'm not saying he's a saint, I'm not saying he's perfect, but Trump is bringing a breath of fresh air and of freedom for us who are operating on the internet. I mean, I had 5 PayPal accounts removed and no longer able to work through the use of PayPal. So it's because during that time, they also intervened blocking PayPal out of all things.
So, yeah, they have their tricks. But I'm glad that you've been set free of that. That's a bonus, because not many are. So I'm glad that you are back on track with that again. Wow.
Well, I mean, I'm very glad to be an American, to be able to do my books and to do my work without being persecuted for it. So I'm very glad that we have a First Amendment. I'm very glad we have a Second Amendment that also guarantees us to be actually have the possibility of defending ourselves. And all this thanks to, let's say, a change at the White House, which actually demonstrates that something actually happens when you vote here in the United States, on the contrary of many other countries where you can vote whatever you want, like Great Britain, you can vote here, you can vote there, but then in the end it's all rigged. No, any other country seems to be rigged with this illusion of democracy. Here it seems that democracy to some extent is respected. So I hope that in exposing today the problem of the campus agendas, we have also raised concerns for a lot of young people, but also for their parents who might maybe have a talk with their kids before sending them in these brainwashing centers.
Right, exactly.
Thank you so much for having me on. And of course, we will see each other for the book club.
Yes, we will indeed. And I want to just say to you, thank you so much, Leo, for joining us with your infinite wisdom on this topic. Very, very interesting and important for us to hear as well. So I want to say thank you to everybody for joining me on this Friday night. Date night. It's our last Friday of the month. We have date night with Leo. I think that's what I'm going to call our shows from now on. Date night with Leo.
Yeah, before the book club, with the purchase of this book, which will be the first one we will be discussing in our upcoming book club, which we've been talking about for a long time. It's volume 12 of my Confessions. You can purchase it and read it, reading the prior volumes of the Confessions, and it's definitely a book that is gonna bring you a lot of knowledge that we all need for a major awareness, like Chantelle is trying to bring to her viewers every time with her shows. God bless you all and take care. See you soon.
Okay, thank you, Leo. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining me. Always great to be with you guys. And yes, so if you haven't got yourself a copy of Leo's book yet, please do so. And I will let you know this coming week when we've rescheduled the book club with Leo. And if I'm just going to give it one quick repeat for those of you who don't know. Membership, YouTube membership. For those who are members, we will do a live book club with Leo. I'll reschedule the date, and you buy a copy of his book, you read it, you bring your questions to the book club, and he will answer you live and also go into whatever details of the book, his book. And we will start with 12, and then we'll go through the others. Each month we'll do a different one. So look forward to having you guys join me there. And of course, Samantha Plested as well. Q&A on anything you want to know about the transsexual world, because as she says, trans is not real. Difference between a transgender person and a transsexual person. So she gives great information. If you haven't watched her show yet, I think she was on a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. Please go check it out. And then I'll see you this weekend on Saturday on Aquarius Rising. Tomorrow, that is, with Kathy O'Brien. We're going to be talking about MK Ultra and really just her unpacking that for us as only Kathy O'Brien can. I mean, we know she's brilliant. And then on Sunday, on Solutions with Shanti, we have Kathy O'Brien again, and we're going to be talking about solutions, healing, and harmony. Yay. Okay, guys. Bye. Thank you. What is that? Hold up. When is Greatest Story? Drift Speed, the Greatest Story was on this morning, but on Rumble. Please go and find out because we got struck because of that show. So the Greatest Story of Untold Story of Hitler, Adolf Hitler. Sorry, I don't remember the proper name now, but that is on Rumble. So we've done the first 2 shows here, and then the next 2 shows we've done on Rumble. The one from today was on Rumble as well. Very, 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 very interesting, I have to say. So I'd love to hear your guys' feedback and comments on that one, especially. Do I have Dutch origin, Chantelle? Oh, hell yeah. My father was strong Dutch, strong British, strong Viking too. So those are my three main bloodlines from my father's side. Mainly Dutch, then British, then Scandinavian. Cool. Okay, guys and girls, take care of yourselves. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. God bless you all. Okay, that'd be good. No. Bye-bye.